안녕하세요. 한국경제신문 워싱턴나우 구독자 여러분. 오늘 저는 워싱턴DC에 있는 아널 골든 그레고리라는 로펌에 와 있습니다. 여기 계신 변호사님들이 한국 기업들을 많이 도와주고 계시는데요. 이분들에게 오늘은 트럼프 대통령이 추진하고 있는 여러 가지 관세 정책의 효과에 관해서 들어보고 또 한국 기업들이 미국에 진출할 때 주의해야 할 점 여러 가지 조언들을 함께 해보려고 합니다. 세 분 혹시 한번 인사를 해주실 수 있을까요?
Sure.
This is Mike Burke.
Yes. My name is Mike Burke. I'm a partner here with Arnold Golden Gregory, and I practice in international commerce.
Allison Rayleigh. I'm a partner here as well. I am a regulatory compliance in finance and also global trade, and Mike and I work together often on importing and exporting questions.
Hi, my name is Lance Lee. I'm also a partner at Arnold Golden Gregory, and my practice area is international litigation and arbitration as well as international trade. And I also work with Mike and Allison.
Yes.
네, 저희 처음 질문은 역시 관세 정책이겠죠. 트럼프 대통령이 지금 멕시코하고 캐나다를 향한 관세 정책을 지난 4일 날 발표를 했습니다. 이로 인한 여러 가지 경제적인 효과가 예상되고 있습니다. 특히 미국이 오히려 이러한 정책으로 인해서 피해를 볼 가능성에 대해서도 여러 가지 우려가 있는데요.
Do I mean? I mean, it already has. I think that the Dow Jones is down 600 points so far today. You know, the tariffs will exacerbate inflation. They've already upset our closest two trading partners. And it's going to result in higher prices for the American consumer. And in some cases, especially with the Canadians who produce so many pharmaceuticals that come into the U.S., there may be some significant product shortages in really important areas.
Yeah, I think that our supply chain is one thing that could be really affected by this as people, and that could even extend beyond just what we're seeing immediately right here as companies work through stockpiles that they may have collected in anticipation of the imposing tariffs or impending tariffs. So it could be, we don't even know the full effects of that at this moment. It'll most likely play out over the next several months.
Absolutely. And I think also from a practical standpoint, in the past I bought milk for $3. Now I'm going to have to buy it for $7,
Yes.
for example.
Right.
So it goes both ways in terms of the receiving country of the tariffs as well as the U.S. The price of goods is likely to go up, so that's going to affect us.
With industry-specific tariffs on steel and automobiles and lumber and pharmaceuticals and etc., 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 and reciprocal tariffs by different countries are being announced, there are still mixed evaluations on whether this is ultimately a negotiation strategy or if the tariffs themselves are the goals of this Trump administration. All these tariffs will be there in 4 years later when Trump administration.
To our tariff, one thing that is important, especially at looking at countries like Korea, is it's not only going to be their tariffs that we look at when we are enacting country-specific tariffs. It's also taxes, VATs, and any other non-tariff specific duty that a country may place on U.S. imported products, which we will be looking at, or our administration will be looking at for potential retaliatory tariffs or countermeasure tariffs to country specifics.
I was a little surprised that he actually went through with the Mexican tariffs today,
That's right.
especially because the Mexican government turned over a fairly significant, I guess the old word would be narco-terrorist or
Right.
drug lord, and,
Yes.
and we thought that was what
Right.
Mexico needed to do to get itself out of the tariffs. I think, you know, it's like Allison said, this administration is inherently unpredictable. I do think, you know, Korea is on Trump's master list of countries he wants to tariff. I suspect that the real reason there would be more to maybe draw down American troops in Korea or adjust at least the economics of the defense relationship. From what I mean, my experience with Korean tariffs, you know, Korea is a very open trading society. I can't imagine,
Right.
Sure.
you know, there's no grounds for a retaliatory tariff by us on Korea.
Right,
Absolutely.
and many of them are even around the 0% tariff rate. Even looking at non-traditional tariff tariff duties that are placed on imports from the United States into Korea, and especially we have such a great agreement with the Korean country currently. So it really is. It's unknown, and I think that Korea has been very proactive in understanding the risk and approaching conversations with the United States administration, and I think that's something that would behoove them to continue doing in the future.
For example, in 2007, the Korea-U.S. FTA, Free Trade Agreement, 0 tariffs on Korean automobiles exported to the U.S. That was the agreement. But now there's a potential revisiting of this particular tariff and the situation, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be a very challenging time for Korean companies.
Right.
And even though Korean auto manufacturers are some of the largest direct investors in the Southeast,
That's right.
especially, I do wonder how they're going to sort of offset the supply chain problems that are going to happen in Michigan with imports. Are they going to allow? I mean, I don't think they know what they're going to do.
Right.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you guys think this kind of a strategy would work? Would Mr. Trump get what he wants later?
I think it's an incredibly short-sighted approach to dealing with some potentially serious issues, especially if you take the non-tariff actions or inactions the administration has taken, since January 20th. Tariffs traditionally are meant to redress trade imbalances or market access problems, and they're not in this case. It's something, they're after something else. I still can't quite figure out what they're after with the Canadians, other than this, let's make them the 51st state, kind of forgetting there's 13 provinces and territories in Canada, and they would be, states 51 through 64.
64th state.
It's just it's the chaos that was a hallmark of the last administration. It's come back on steroids. But I think at some point, either if inflation in the U.S. gets too high or unemployment, which the last unemployment report wasn't great, or some domestic economic reason, I think he would be forced to pull back.
What do you think of the impact tariffs against Mexico and Canada? Because the tariff rate is a little bit higher than China against China. So which means the United States is imposing the tariffs to their partners, higher tariffs for their partners and lower tariff for actually adversaries such as China. And he is trying to go well with Russia.
Another thing that's been floated for Canada and Mexico, the need for a higher trade with those specific countries, not only government subsidies, but the altering of goods through China to Mexico and Canada as a way to skirt some of our tariffs that were originally on China. So I think that could be at play here. Again, it's a really interesting tact that he's taking with continuing on in Canada and Mexico when we have such important importable products from those two countries. And I do understand, trying to even out some of the industries to assist Americans in having a more equal global economy in those industries. That's one factor, but that takes years to develop those industries when, as Mike mentioned, pharmaceuticals from Canada, that's one of our large importers of our pharmaceuticals. And yes, it would be, and would be great if we continue to develop that capability within the United States, of course. But until we get there, that could have a major supply chain issue for many Americans who rely on day-to-day medicine to survive.
I fully agree with Allison. It's not just the tariffs isolated in and of itself, but tariffs as one aspect of overall negotiation. So, for example, with South Korea, you have defense. Right? If you use tariffs or apply tariffs, then that could also impact your negotiating leverage around this defense, or creating jobs in the U.S., for example, or manufacturing facilities in the U.S. All of this is interrelated, so it's really interesting how this is going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, having spent so much time in Canada and having family up there, I think the Canadian tariffs are the ones that offend me the most. I just don't understand. I think there's part of it can be a personal animus between Trump and Trudeau, but Trump thought that this was going to be some sort of checkmate move on the Canadians. I have not, arguably since the 1996 Olympics, seen Canada, as united as they are right now on tariffs. And I think going into the tariffs, the presumption was that the Conservative Party in October's elections would have a significant victory in Canada, but that's what Trump has done, is upended that. The Conservatives are still ahead, but the Liberals, especially if they end up nominating Mark Carney, could, and a Liberal government in Canada under Mark Carney will be more combative towards the United States on tariffs than a Conservative government would be.
Right.
What are the outlooks for IRA and Chips Act? What do you think of that? Will they still exist after 4 years? What do you think?
I think that they will.
They will.
And the reason is the IRA and the CHIPS Act was developed to promote manufacturing and investment in the United States, essentially. So CHIPS Act, semiconductor manufacturing facilities in the U.S. and various states here. And also the IRA, EV automobile manufacturing facilities here. So those acts are actually very helpful to the U.S. economy insofar as the facilities are being created here on the ground and jobs are being created, and the technology is also remaining in the U.S. So there could be some negotiation with respect to how much incentive will be provided pursuant to these acts, but personally I think that they're here to stay because in the long run it benefits the U.S. economy.
I agree with. I agree with you, Lance. I mean, these statutes were extensively negotiated and have deep bipartisan support, and I have a hard time thinking that this Congress would have any appetite to go back in and repeal either statute. What we might see, kind of to your point, is that money that previously been allocated to specific projects under either statute could be frozen.
Right.
Which you can get into the constitutional aspects of whether the executive cannot spend money the legislative is earmarked, but I think we might see some of that, and then resulting litigation and whatnot.
My only additional point is, I think under this new administration, one thing, and they both kind of touched on this, one thing that we will likely see is regulations and agencies and agreements that are on the books that aren't necessarily enacted under this, or there won't be enforcement of those regulations and acts. Different than your question slightly, but I think it's important to note that simply because this administration is not looking for enforcement in specific areas, if the statute or the act or the regulation remains on the books without repeal, which is most likely what would happen, the next president may go back to enforcing those prior regulations and acts. So I think that's something that that is a real challenge for us right now, giving business-minded advice, is how do you manage regulations and acts and statutes that we know aren't going to be enforced, but aren't going to be repealed in this moment.
Remind them that the statute of limitations is usually 5 years.
Exactly.
So, say what you will. Yeah, I mean, say what you will about the FCPA or any money laundering regulations. You pull something now, the next administration is going to be very interested in what you did. Once they, once they come into power.
So
absolutely. Go ahead.
Especially in the tech space. I mean, we're getting questions very similarly to that, and that is the response I give is, the statute of limitations is longer than the administration is going to be. So, to keep that in mind with whoever is elected next to our presidents.
Exactly. Exactly. And to Allison and Mike's point, this is really important because these acts are here, but it's a question of how they're going to be enforced.
Right.
Like Allison was just saying, is like, how are they going to be enforced? And there's a reason why the CEO of TSMC flew into DC yesterday and said on the news, we're going to invest $100 billion into the U.S. Because there's an issue as to how enforcement of the benefits they're receiving will take place. So they need to sort of work together with the current administration.
And how should Korean companies prepare for, how can they be better prepared for this Trump administration era?
It's important to be preemptive, and to be proactive, and not simply say, okay, well, maybe Trump and the current administration will forget about Korea and just leave Korea the way that it was. My colleagues made this point earlier, which is Korea is on the map, and Korea is on Trump's radar. So rather than being reactive, to be proactive and do something, find a strategy, make a strategy, maybe like yesterday with the SMC, to find a way to create a situation where you can turn this into an opportunity.
I mean, sort of give the administration some early victories that they can, at least they can claim.
Yes.
And to the extent, there's any advice. I mean, this administration is inherently unpredictable. You can't give advice to that. But the two areas, or maybe there's more than two, but understanding that now your relationship with the White House is probably the most important thing.
That's right.
To Lance's point, give them victories. Take the time to try to figure out what they may really want with Korean companies. The flip side to that, somewhat, is that if tariffs continue, inflation in the U.S. will go up, which in turn means the won appreciates relative to the dollar, which then means you've got Korean companies who can come in here and make acquisitions at a comparatively less expensive rate than they would today. So keep an eye out for opportunities as well.
And I think one additional thing worth noting too is both very good points on the federal level, and I know we're speaking about Trump today specifically in our administration federally, but in the United States, our states operate very uniquely, and we have, specifically Georgia, we have and Arkansas, we have very friendly foreign investment states. So simply because there may be resistance, and again, I realize we're talking about our administration and tariffs, which are federal. But just because there may be some resistance at a federal level, you'll still find very sympathetic regulators and investment regulation state-based. So I think for Korean companies and Korean investors, looking at which states are friendly to foreign investment and who have sandboxes for technology development and other emerging technologies opportunities within states, I think is it's a really good moment to do that and invest in your relationships with your state regulators as well. That's one thing that we often do is we help identify which states fit the profile of what incoming countries or incoming clients from other countries are seeking to do.
Some companies are hesitating to choose which state to invest in because some Korean companies have this kind of thinking because there is Mr. Trump now. So do we have to choose a red state to invest in? What do you think of this kind of approach?
So
That's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question.
But it's a great question.
It is a great
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you all feel, so I'll just give my Allison opinion. I think that many states that have I don't think red and blue do matter, but when you're looking at state-based regulations, I think that you'll see a good mix of both. And then Georgia's obviously a swing state, so sometimes it's red and sometimes it's blue, and yet Georgia is, and that's where Lance is based. Georgia is one of the best companies for foreign investment and companies coming in. So I think although excellent point, I think looking at which states saw the opportunity of encouraging foreign investors, foreign companies to come and build commerce in their state, I think that's more of being economically wise versus a red or blue mindset.
I mean, if you're looking to come into the U.S., and you don't know anything about state incentives, you're gonna look at Texas, Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina. That's the way I'm counting. It's what, 3 blue, 1 red? No, 3 red, 1 blue. But you're right. I mean, I think you've got to figure out what jurisdictions make the most sense for you, the company. Where can you get good employees, skilled employees? That's a big question.
Points, because at the end of the day, it's who's friendly to you.
Right.
Who's going to be your friend and help you? Right? And when you look at states like Georgia or the Carolinas, Arkansas, very open to foreign investment, very open to Korean companies investing. Incentives in terms of taxes, incentive in terms of basically providing community support, providing land, infrastructure. This is really important, and I think as a rule of thumb, go where people are friendly to you and hospitable to you, and then you'll do well.
Right.
Do you have any kind of advice for them to how to manage the new entity in the United States, because it's kind of a new experience for them, and they will make lots of mistakes. What kind of challenges do you see mostly for the Korean companies, and how if you have any kind of advice for them to overcome this kind of?
Well, I think that it's very important to have a game plan. I mean, to not simply think, okay, well, we've opened up shop here, and we'll just conduct business, but to have an overall strategy on what steps you're going to take on each very important area, such as labor, such as joint ventures, such as M&As, such as government relationships, right? And to sit down and talk with experts and figure out what you plan to do in these areas. Like government relations, as Allison and Mike were talking about, so important. You need to have the support of your state government. You can't just be in a vacuum and say, oh, I'll just conduct business and everything else is extraneous or not less important. And that's something that one needs a game plan for, a preemptive plan, not just, oh, we'll just go day by day and see what happens, but to have a very specific outline and a plan on how to be successful in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and further down.
Yeah, I think that Lance is exactly right. The game plan is important. I think also, I think you or maybe it was Mike spoke on this too. The community is so important. In Georgia specifically, there is a large community of Korean companies and Korean speaking, and finding communities within your area, I think, is also critical. Our law firm has a Korean practice group that we're all on, and making those connections with businesses and also individuals within your space can really benefit you, because everyone's cheering for you and wants to support you. And if you've got a quick question, you can pick up and ask a friend company or an attorney that you're connected with, or accountants. And I think that kind of like what Lance and Mike were saying, if you find where the friendly to you area is, you can have good opportunities. And then the best way, when you come into a state specifically, I think, is to look if you have any licensing obligations or registration obligations. And even if you're on the fence, most regulators are vastly friendlier if you reach out and say, do I need to be doing something,
Right.
Versus if they identify you're present in their state and then are like, hey, we think you need to be licensed. So being proactive in those settings is also really important, and it's a good way to build goodwill and relationships with your potential regulators or commerce groups.
You need to have boots on the ground.
Yeah.
You need to, too often I've seen companies, not Korean companies, but companies from other jurisdictions say, well, we're gonna form an affiliate, and it's just gonna act as a sales agent for us. And
Right.
That those fail 6 or 7 times out of 10. If you're going to make an investment in the United States, you've got to send the right people from Korea, and not just for a week, but for a year or 2 years or 3 years. And those people have to be invested with decision-making authority, at least relative to the U.S. entity. That is a huge factor in whether a U.S. expansion fails or succeeds.
Well, and to that point, that's a good point, Mike. Depending on what industry you're in, you may be required to have C-suite operatives or C-suite officers within the United States, especially if you're in a finance type space or healthcare. You have to have the finance, at least a chief compliance officer in the United States. So looking at your officer obligations is also critical from a regulatory standpoint, but very critical from an overall success and growth standpoint. And I think being patient is also important. Coming to a new country and figuring all of these things out is not something you can do in a 6-month time period. It takes time.
Basically, for headquarters to say, okay, we entrust you not just as a sales office, but as an operating entity here, and of course, there needs coordination. Coordination is necessary, reporting, understanding from Seoul and from the offices here. But at the same time, authority and a clear role is critical to success.
And I think it's differentiating between, what you might call big picture decisions that you have to take in consultation with headquarters in Seoul or anywhere else, versus kind of more day-to-day might not be the best phrase for it, but decisions that, frankly, the headquarters in Seoul shouldn't waste their time making or thinking about. So
my only comment would be, as we continue to monitor what's going on globally, AGG and other resources have an executive order tracker that we're putting out, as well as just staying on top of understanding how your supply chain may be affected by either our tariffs or counter tariffs. And, that's really, as we are in a very unpredictable time, as these continue to roll out, just looking even beyond country specific, but also product specific, as you mentioned, the aluminum and steel and potentially wood and some other areas in the future. I think that, that'll be a really critical thing for Korea, even though currently we have such a great trade relationship. One of the things that a lot of our clients are doing is looking at their HTS codes for importing products to the United States to make sure they're using the most accurate code, but then also is there a code that the product better fits into, which then better aligns with a tariff strategy. And of course, I don't mean using a wrong code, but just analyzing things that you may not have looked at for 5 years or so. Now this is an opportunity to take a step back, make sure you're using the correct codes to best defend and best put yourself in a position for the correct and accurate and least tariff amount possible.
Well, and related to that, doing a country of origin analysis,
Yes.
because a lot
Yes.
of companies will say, "Well, I make this stuff in Canada. It's
Right.
Canadian origin," and it might not be.
It's
I
not.
mean, Canada might not be the best example because there's specific rules on country of origin under USMCA, but it's not always where the item is finished.
Right.
In the pharmaceutical field, usually the country of origin is where the API comes from. Not where it's put into
Few.
pills or
Right. Right.
so
Today we had a great conversation, and thank you for
Thank
really
you.
nice advices for Korean companies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Yes.